Researchers uncover a long-lost plane encased in an Arctic iceberg, but their excitement quickly turns to horror as they peer inside. Their screams echo through the icy tomb, revealing a truth more terrifying than they could have imagined. The harsh Arctic wind whipped across Dr. Amelia Frost's face, stinging her cheeks and nose despite the layers of protective gear. For weeks, her team aboard the icebreaker Aurora had been tracking an unusually large iceberg, drawn by its peculiar shape and unexpected trajectory. However, nothing could have prepared them for what they encountered that fateful day. "Is that what I think it is?" gasped Dr. Frost, her voice barely audible over the howling wind and the crunch of ice against the ship's hull. Her colleague, Dr. Marcus Chen, a renowned glaciologist with a penchant for the impossible, snatched the binoculars from her hands. His eyes widened in disbelief as he focused on the bizarre anomaly before them. "Impossible," he muttered, adjusting the focus frantically, as if doing so might change what he was seeing. Jutting out from the massive iceberg like a bizarre frozen sculpture was the unmistakable nose of a commercial airliner. Ice clung to its fuselage, creating a ghostly shroud that blurred the lines between metal and glacier. Icicles hung from its wings like crystalline fingers, reaching for the churning sea below. "We've found it," Amelia breathed, her heart racing so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. "The long-lost Flight 2317. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of decades of mystery and speculation. For 35 years, the disappearance of Flight 2317 had remained one of aviation's greatest enigmas, a puzzle that had confounded experts and conspiracy theorists alike. The plane had vanished without a trace during a routine transarctic flight in 1989, carrying 207 passengers and crew into the unknown. Search parties had combed the vast, unforgiving Arctic for months, but not a scrap of debris had ever been found. Until now. As the Aurora carefully navigated the treacherous waters around the iceberg, Amelia's mind raced with questions. How had the plane become encased in ice? What forces of nature, or perhaps something more sinister, could have caused such a bizarre crash? And more importantly, what secrets lay frozen within its hull? "Dr. Nakamura," Dr. Frost called to Sarah Nakamura, the team's ice specialist. "You need to see this." Amelia rushed to her side, where an array of instruments blinked in alarm. "The readings they're displaying defy explanation," Sarah explained, pointing to a graph with wildly fluctuating lines. "It's not normal. The crystalline structure, the density, it's like nothing I've ever seen before." A chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold ran down Amelia's spine. Whatever had happened to Flight 2317 was becoming clear. This was more than just a simple crash and freeze. As the Aurora inched closer to the entombed aircraft, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of uncovering something mind-blowing. "At the very least, prepare the exploration team," she ordered, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Standing on the deck of the Aurora, Dr. Amelia Frost gazed at the plane encased in ice. She had dedicated her career to unraveling the secrets of the Arctic, a passion born from an unusual childhood. Her father, Captain James Frost, was a seasoned pilot who had flown countless missions over polar regions. The disappearance of Flight 2317 had captivated Amelia's imagination when she was just 10 years old. She vividly remembered the day her father came home, his face ashen, to break the news about the missing plane. That night, as young Amelia lay in bed, she made a silent vow to solve the mystery one day. Now, as the lead researcher on this expedition, she felt as if her entire life had been leading to this moment. "Dr. Chen," Dr. Frost called out, snapping Marcus out of his reverie. "Are you ready to begin the preliminary assessment?" Chen, a renowned aerospace engineer specializing in extreme environmental aircraft failures, had been skeptical when Amelia first approached him about joining the expedition. But now, faced with the impossible sight before them, his eyes gleamed with a mix of scientific curiosity and barely contained excitement. As the Aurora anchored near the iceberg, Amelia's team sprang into action with well-practiced efficiency. Dr. Chen, armed with an array of high-tech scanning equipment, began assessing the structural integrity of the exposed portion of the plane. Meanwhile, Sarah Nakamura started analyzing the composition of the iceberg itself. Handpicked by Amelia for her innovative approach to ice core analysis, Sarah's usual exuberance faded as she studied her instruments, replaced by a look of confusion and concern. "The ice formation is unusual," she reported, frowning at her tablet. "The crystalline structure, the density, the trace elements, none of it matches known Arctic ice patterns. It's almost as if the plane was flash frozen instantly." Amelia's brow furrowed, struggling to process the information. "That's impossible," she muttered, more to herself than to Sarah. "Even in the harshest Arctic conditions, it would take time for ice to form like this." "We're talking about the laws of thermodynamics here." Dr. Chen joined them, his face grave. "The plane's structure is equally baffling. So far, there's no sign of impact damage or the kind of structural stress we'd expect from a crash landing. It's as if the plane just stopped in midair and was immediately encased in ice." As they debated the implications of these impossible findings, a sound like a gunshot echoed across the water. The team watched in horror as a large section of ice near the plane's tail began to splinter, cracks spreading like lightning across the surface of the iceberg. "Everyone back to the ship!" Amelia shouted, her heart pounding in her ears. They scrambled across the ice, the groaning and cracking of the iceberg spurring them on. They barely made it to safety before a massive chunk of the iceberg calved away, taking a portion of the plane's tail with it. The section of ice disappeared beneath the churning waves, leaving behind a gaping wound in the iceberg and taking with it potential clues about Flight 2317's fate. As the team caught their breath on the Aurora's deck, a tense silence fell over them. The near miss had shaken them all, highlighting the dangers of their mission and the fragility of the evidence they sought. Once the immediate danger had passed, Amelia gathered her team in the ship's conference room. Maps and satellite images of the region covered the walls, and a 3D hologram of the iceberg and plane rotated slowly above the central table. "We need to get inside that plane," Amelia said firmly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Whatever happened to Flight 2317, the answers are in there, and we might not have much time before the rest of the iceberg breaks apart." She looked around at her team, Chen's calculating gaze, Sarah's nervous excitement, and the mix of fear and determination on the faces of the others. They all understood the risks, but they also knew the importance of what they might discover. As the team began to plan their approach to the plane, none of them could shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something much larger, far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Equipped with ice axes, crampons, and state-of-the-art thermal suits, Amelia's team began their perilous ascent of the iceberg. They moved slowly toward the exposed fuselage of Flight 2317, each step calculated and precise. As they neared the plane, the true scale of their challenge became apparent. The aircraft's emergency exit, their planned point of entry, was frozen shut, sealed by decades of strange metallic ice. The door was barely visible, just a slight indentation in the icy tomb encasing the fuselage. Amelia surveyed the situation, her mind racing through potential solutions. "We'll have to cut through," she decided, pulling out a specially designed thermal lance from her pack. This recent invention, combining laser technology with traditional heating elements, was their best hope for penetrating the unusual ice. Hours passed as they worked to create an opening. Finally, with a resounding crack that seemed to echo across the vast expanse of ice, the door gave way. Steeling herself, Amelia peered into the darkness. Her headlamp cut through the gloom, illuminating rows of seats still occupied by passengers. What she saw made her scream in horror. "My God," whispered Sarah, her voice trembling. "It's like they just froze in place." As the team cautiously entered the cabin, the full extent of the anomaly became clear. Despite the decades that had passed, there was no sign of decomposition, no frost damage, no decay. The passengers looked as if they might wake at any moment. Amelia pushed forward, her heart pounding in her chest. As unsettling as the passenger cabin was, she knew their answers lay further ahead. She had to find the cockpit, hoping to uncover something that might reveal what had really happened to Flight 2317. With a deep breath to steady herself, she gripped the handle of the cockpit door and pushed. The door creaked open, protesting after decades of disuse. Amelia stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The two pilots sat motionless in their seats, their hands still on the controls. Like the passengers behind them, they showed no signs of decay. Their skin was pale but unmarked by time. As Amelia's gaze fell upon the captain, something shifted in her perception. The man's face was eerily familiar. For a fleeting moment, she felt as if she were staring at her own father. It was an unsettling image that both terrified and intrigued her. "Dr. Frost," Marcus's voice broke the stillness behind her. "Look at the control panel." He pointed to a series of switches and instruments, all illuminated by a soft, ghostly light. Amelia moved closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The dials and readings were unlike anything she had ever seen. They pulsed rhythmically, giving off an ethereal glow, as if the plane itself were alive. "What the hell is this?" Sarah breathed, her voice filled with awe and fear. Amelia knelt, examining the readings. "It looks like some kind of energy source," she murmured, struggling to comprehend. The implications of what she was seeing were staggering. They had stumbled upon something that defied all known laws of physics, something that might explain how the plane had become trapped in ice without damage. "We need to document everything," Amelia instructed, her mind racing with the possibilities. They had uncovered evidence of a technology beyond comprehension, something that could rewrite history. As they gathered samples and data, a sudden rumble shook the plane, sending them tumbling. "We need to get out of here!" Amelia shouted, panic rising. The structure of the iceberg had shifted, and the threat of collapse loomed over them. Rushing back toward the exit, they fought against the shifting ground beneath their feet. Just as they reached the hatch, a deafening crack echoed through the cabin. The ice that had encased the plane began to splinter, threatening to swallow them whole. One by one, they climbed out, only to find themselves on the edge of an abyss where the iceberg had begun to calve, chunks of ice falling into the dark waters below. They raced back to the safety of the Aurora, adrenaline surging through their veins. As they reached the deck, they turned to watch in horror as the iceberg broke apart, taking their precious discovery with it. "We can't leave empty-handed," Amelia yelled, her voice a mix of determination and desperation. "We need to send a drone down, get as much data as we can." With frantic efficiency, they deployed the drone, watching as it plunged into the icy depths, capturing images of the chaos below. But Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of something monumental. What had they uncovered? What happened to Flight 2317? The questions haunted her as they stood on the deck of the Aurora, the wind whipping around them. Whatever secrets lay beneath the ice were slipping away. But one truth remained. The Arctic had revealed more than they had bargained for. And with it, Amelia Frost knew that their lives, and perhaps the fate of humanity, might never be the same.